starting the recording. And so this is recording, and the video of this usually gets posted early next week when our director of marketing, who for whatever reason he's the person who posts the videos and sends out the emails, so when he gets around to it, usually it'll be Monday or Tuesday, he'll post the video up, so it'll be on YouTube. You can share with any colleagues who couldn't be here for the live presentation. So let me just go through the regular housekeeping business. First thing to note is that you are all muted, so I can't hear you, and that's the way it's set up by default for a webinar. And so if you want to communicate with me during the webinar, you can type in the chat box or the question box, whatever you see in the GoToWebinar interface there. And if you do that, I'll see it pop up on my screen, and then I'll try to answer you. So that's number one. So don't try to talk to me on the microphone. I won't be able to hear you. However, I do encourage any questions as we go along. So feel free to type in the chat box at any time. What else? I guess that's about it. Recording is going, so I see a couple more people just joined, so that's good. So we're just getting started, and today's topic is creating a simple report, and this, of course, is the latest in a series, actually a series that's been going on for like 2.25 years now. Latest in a series of these short webinars to introduce you to some basic topics, in many cases just to get you started, get you a taste of how to do things, and then you can dive into the documentation and acquire more advanced knowledge. So again, as we go along, if anybody has trouble hearing or seeing the presentation, please type in the chat box. That does happen sometimes where the audio gets cut off or the video gets cut off. Please let me know if that does happen. Okay, so we'll get started. Today's topic is creating a simple report, and this might be our first reporting topic. All the other topics, I believe, that we did over the past couple of years were all related to dashboards and some related to data manipulation. So we did a lot of work in the Visual Composer, creating dashboards and looking at all different aspects of dashboards, and we did some work, I believe, in a data worksheet where you can do data manipulation and mashup. I don't think we've done any report design, and so today will be the first introduction to that. Report design is done using a different tool than we've used before, which is called Style Studio. It's a desktop Java application. And so what we're going to do is I'm actually going to try to do 2 or 3 short examples from our basic training course. And the examples I have over here on a slide somewhere are this one, a very basic report. It's just a chart and a table, just to get you acquainted with the basics of making a really rudimentary report with a chart and a table. And the second example is similar kind of thing, except there's a little bit more going on here. We'll look a little bit at filtering in a report, dynamic filtering, that is parameterized filtering, and also doing highlights. You see that there's a green highlight that appears here. And then if we have time, we'll move on to a summary type report that drills down to this detail information. So that's the plan. Again, it's just to give you a taste of basic reporting topics. So let's begin with this very simple report here. And as I said, the tool that we use to create reports is called Style Studio, which some of you are probably familiar with. So I'm going to look for that. All right, in my installation program group here, find Style Studio. All right, and that starts up the desktop application, which is useful not only for creating reports, but for a bunch of other things also. So, for example, setting up data sources, creating data models, and you can also do data worksheets in this tool, create table styles, write scripts, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So it's a pretty versatile tool. Now, one thing I should mention is that the plan is in the next version of our software, there actually will be also a web-based report design tool, which we've had in previous versions, and then kind of took a little bit of a intermission from providing that tool. But hopefully in the next version of the software there will also be a web-based report design tool. But this is the desktop. This is the full-fledged desktop report design tool. So to create that report that we saw on the slide back here, right, this one over here. So the first thing I want to do is to create a blank report. So let me find Style Studio, go up to the New button at the top, and I'll select a report over here. This is the new asset dialog box, select report. There's obviously many things you can do here. Today we're just looking at reports, so select report, blank tabular report on the right side. And this gives me a blank report. Hopefully everybody can more or less see what we've got here. So this is the report page, and basically I'm going to put elements onto this page. You can see that the interface is somewhat involved. There are different panels here. I'm not going to get too much into what all these panels do. That'll be something that we can explore on an ongoing basis as we get into other reporting topics. In this simple example, I just want to first of all add a title to the top of the report page. And you can see up here there's a special region. This is a header region. Down at the bottom of the page there's a footer region. When I click on it you can see it gets outlined. In the event that you ever have trouble selecting those, there's also buttons at the top here that will select those regions. So for example, this button here selects the header region. There are different types of headers, but the standard header basically gets repeated on every page of the report. So if you put something in this header region, whatever you put up here gets repeated at the top of every page of the report. In many cases that's desirable. In cases where that's not what you want, there are alternative types of headers that you can select. All right, there's a first page header, even page, odd page, and you can also set up custom headers that only appear on certain pages. In this case, what we'll do to add the text up here that says sales by state report is that we'll simply drag a text element in there. So I'll grab a text element from this toolbox panel here, obviously, and drag it into that header region and type the text, sales by state report. So that adds a text element, and then I can simply format that text element and center it in a pretty typical way, mainly using the buttons up at the top and toolbar over here. So I can do a center alignment. I can make it 18 point and bold. All right, so there's a header, and like I said, because I'm using the default header region, that would be repeated at the top of every page of the report. In this case, the report only has a single page, as you can see here. Actually, that might not be true. It might go on to a second page. We'll have to see. But if it does go on to a second page, then that header will appear at the top of the second page also. Okay, let's continue with the chart here. And basically the idea here is that the chart is going to pull data from a very simple query that contains and returns only states and the total sales in each state. So the query itself is already aggregating the data, grouping it into just states and the aggregated total sales. So let's go ahead and add a chart. All right, and to the chart I'll put into the body region of the report, and you'll notice that there's an insertion point. The insertion point shows you where a new component will be placed. And basically in a report there's essentially a flow through the report. There's an orderly flow, and one component gets placed following another component. So it's always a good idea when you're designing reports to pay attention to where that insertion point is. Otherwise you might get surprised if you're not aware where that insertion point is and you click to add a new component. It might pop in to the report in a location that is not where you want. Of course you can always move it or cut and paste it or whatever. But anyway, let's go back to the toolbox and we'll find a chart component, and I'll just drag that chart component into the body of the report. And that creates a blank chart. On the left side of Style Studio, when you have a chart, you'll see and you select the chart, you'll see the chart editor, and it will probably come as a little comfort if some of this looks new to you. It will be somewhat comforting that the chart editor itself is basically the same chart editor that we've used previously when designing dashboards. All right, so if you put a chart into a dashboard, you see this chart editor. Some of the controls are in different places, but basically it's all identical because the charts in reports and the charts in dashboards are essentially identical. It's the same features, same editor, pretty much same everything. So we'll just go ahead and set up the chart. The one difference is that when you're designing a dashboard, which again is what we've done for most of these webinars, a dashboard has a single data source that's associated with the dashboard as a whole, right? So when you design a dashboard, when you create a new view sheet is a dashboard, when you create a new view sheet, you base that view sheet or dashboard on a particular data source, right? It might be a data model, or it might be a query, might be a database table, but it's a single data source that provides data to the whole dashboard. In reports, it's different. In reports, every element in the report can have its own data source. So for this chart, we can select the data source that's called the sales by state query. So I'm going to look for that in sample queries. There's a query here called sales by state. All right, so there it is. And I can base this chart on the sales by state query. And then if I were to add another chart or another table on down the road, I could base any of those other components on different data sources, right? I could base it on a data model or some other query, right? So that's an important distinction between reports and dashboards that's worthwhile to keep in mind. So, so how do we do this? Well, if you take a look at what's in this query, you can see there's not a whole lot there. There's sales and there's states. So, so this is going to be a pretty easy chart. I'll just grab the state field, put it on the x-axis. Right? And when I do that, you can see that the top panel here basically changed to now show me only the other fields that are available in that query. Right? It's no longer showing me all of the data sources. And the reason for that is that for a single chart needs to be based on a single data source, right? So I couldn't, on the x-axis here, put state from this query, and then on the y-axis put a measure from some other query, right? It won't let me do that. If I wanted to do that, then I'd have to mash up those two queries together, for example, in a data worksheet, and then, you know, base the chart on that result. So, so although reports are more flexible than dashboards in the sense that any given element can be based on its own data source, within an element, you're still, you know, the element itself, the chart itself, is still based on just a single data source, which in this case is the sales by state query. So I'll put state on the x-axis, sales on the y-axis, and that is that's basically it. Now, one thing you'll note here is that we're not seeing the actual data here, right? It says state 1, state 2. Obviously, those are not the actual state names. And if you look at the sales here, this one says, you know, 1,000. That one says, you know, like 900. These are also not the actual numbers, right? In fact, the totals for state by state are much larger than that, probably in the millions or something like that. So what we're looking at here is a metadata representation, right? It's just showing us what this chart is going to be displaying ultimately. It's not showing us the actual data. And that is the default behavior for report design. When you're designing a report, by default, you see only metadata. Right, and that's another distinction between reports and dashboards. In a dashboard, when you design the dashboard, by default, you see the live data, right? As you add charts and tables to a dashboard, right, you see the data in those charts and tables and all the other components, gauges and so on. In a report, by default, you don't. You see metadata. However, just like in a dashboard, you could, if you want, switch to a metadata view. So too, in a report, you could, if you want, switch to a live data view. And for this example, that's what I'll do. There's a button up here at the top called Live Edit, and if you press that button, then it will populate the report with the actual data, right? So now we're looking at the actual data. You can see the actual states, the actual totals, and so on. Okay, so that's kind of a handy way to design a report if the you know, if it's feasible. Right? Why do I say if it's feasible? Because sometimes reports can be quite large, right? Reports have many components, and a lot of reports draw tremendous amounts of data, right? So you might have a report that's pulling millions of records from the database. In cases like that, displaying the live data as you're working, as you're doing your design, might slow down the, you know, gum up the works a little bit, because it's going to have to be continuously running queries on the database as you make modifications, for example, to this chart. If you throw a filtering condition on this chart, it's going to have to rerun the query, right, bring back the data, display the data, right? So when you're dealing with very large reports, very large amounts of data, that can slow up your design process. So if you're in that situation, which is not all that uncommon, then you would probably want to work in metadata view, right? It's not going to run any queries on the database, and your design operations will be very quick. And then what you would do in that case is periodically, if you want to see how things are coming along, you would press the preview button, also in the toolbar, right? And that will generate, it will run the queries, whatever queries are required on the database, pull back the data, and it will show you what your report is looking like. Right, and you can keep the preview tab open. There's actually an option here set at the top called refresh on change. And what that means is that if you make modifications to the report design and then go back to the preview will automatically update. You don't need to regenerate the preview by pressing the button. So that's, it's two different ways of working, either looking at the live data in the design view or just working with metadata. Like I said, for this report, it's so small and simple, I'll just keep the live edit option on so we can look at the live data. So let's just see if there's anything else that we need to do with this chart. The only thing I see is that it looks like the label, the y-axis label, and the formatting on the y-axis are different. So let's just change those things. To change the label, what I'll do is right-click on the chart and select Properties. That opens this giant dialog box that contains chart properties. And then over here, what I can do is I can right-click on the title. Actually, don't need to right-click. Just click on the y-axis title, and then I can change the title over here to say Total Sales. And then if I want to format the y-axis, I can click on the axis values. Right, so that selects the values on the axis, and then I can set a format if I want for those values. If I want to display them in some other manner, for example, using exponential notation or putting commas or something like that, right? I can do that by setting a number format. In this case, we want to display them as millions, right? So what I'll do is select the number option there and then see if there's a format, one of the predefined formats, that will represent that in millions, and there is one, right? It's over here. It's with a capital M, right? So if I select that format, that will give me a representation in terms of millions, right? It's the format is hash, comma, hash, 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 capital M. The hash symbols are basically just placeholders, right? They effectively provide the instruction that we want a comma every 3 places, and then we want the representation in terms of millions, which basically divides the actual value by 1,000,000 and then provides the result. Right. Okay, I think we might have another webinar on formatting, or there might be another video floating around out there on formatting. So I'm not going to go too much into the formatting since this is just an introductory video, or introductory webinar. So I close that dialog box, and then you can see the formatting is applied there to the y-axis. So that chart is done. Let's move on to the table. Looking back at the slide here, not that slide, the other slide. So basically, the table is going to give us the same information as the chart. It's just going to be the states and the sales. Now here they've arranged it in this picture, they've arranged it in a weird way with the state on the right and the sales on the left. I mean, if that appeals to you, that's fine, but I think I'd prefer to see it with the state on the left and the sales on the right. But let's just see how we can go about creating this table. In fact, when you have a table as simple as this one is, let me find the data source. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the query that I want to represent in the table. Again, it's the sales by state query over here. There are several different ways to create a table, but if you have a table that's just going to contain all of the columns from some data source, such as a query, you can actually just drag the entire query into the report, and that will create a table, right? It basically just creates a table that has all of the columns from that query. Now, you wouldn't want to do it that way if the query, for example, had 37 fields in it, 37 columns, and you only wanted a table that displayed 3 of those, right? So then you wouldn't do it that way, because then you'd have to delete all those, 34 of the columns. That would be a real pain. So we'll see an alternative way to create a table in the next example. But this is a quick way when you have a query or a database table or something like that, and you just want to represent that as a report table. So let's just make a few changes to this table, and then we can call this report done. All right, so there's the table below the chart. If I want the state field, right, the state column here on the left side of the sales, then what I can do is click above the column. let's see if I'll get this right. Click above the column and just drag it over to the left. Right? And that just reverses the order of the column. So now I've got the state on the left side and the sales on the right side. What else can we do here? Another thing we can do is to apply a table style in the slide. Right? There's a kind of a style here that has like a blue header and alternating bands, gray and white bands. So I believe we've looked at table styles before when we were doing dashboard design. It's the same thing, right? So just like in a dashboard, you can style a table using either using a global style or by using ad hoc styling, right? So ad hoc styling would mean that you select, for example, a cell of the table and then you apply some style there. For example, I could select this header cell over here, go down to properties, and specify some background color for the cell. So that would be like an example of ad hoc table styling, right? So you could certainly style a table that way, and as well as other components you can style that way. But a table, and for that matter also a crosstab, also has this concept of a global style, which is called a table style. So to set a table style, what you do is you right-click on the table, you select properties for the table, and in the table properties dialog box, down towards the bottom, there's a select style button, and you press that, and then you choose the style that you want. And so, we can try to see if we can find a style like the one in that picture. Not sure that we have exactly that style anymore. You can define your own styles also. That's not something we're going to go into right now. But in the event that none of these, that one's close, but that one's really close. Okay, I'm going to go with that one. I'm just going to go with this one. This is pretty close. It's alternating blue instead of alternating gray. That's fine. So if you're not happy with the built-in styles, you can actually create your own table styles that specify the format for header and footer rows, for different kinds of alternating patterns. For example, every second row, every third row, or every fourth row, every second column, every third column. All these kinds of patterns. You can design your own style. So if you have a corporate table style or something like that, it's probably worthwhile to set up a table style, a global table style that you can then simply apply to any table in any report and also in any dashboard. So when you create your own table style, those table styles are usable both in reports and in dashboards. So I'll just choose that one, press OK, and that table adopts that particular style. Now I can still continue to add other ad hoc formatting. For example, I can select the header cells up at the top, select both of them and center align those. That might make sense. I might want to also center align the state, so I can click on any of the state cells and press the center align button. Now in case you're wondering what this would look like in metadata view, let me just show you. If I turn off the live edit button, the live edit button up here, by the way, is a toggle button, right? You toggle it on, toggle it off. Right, so this is what the table looks like in metadata view. Obviously it looks a bit different, but basically there's the header row, and this row that's called detail, this single row basically expands when the report generates to give us all the different states and sales. You can see that next to that state designation there's a little down arrow, and same thing for sales. That means that state field is expanding downward, right? So when the report generates, or when I turn on the live edit mode and the query runs, that state field will expand downwards to provide all of the different state values. Okay, and you can continue editing. Any editing that you can do in live edit mode, you could also do in metadata mode. So for example, I might want to align the sales values to the right, so I can select that cell and press align to the right. And I might want to format those sales values perhaps as a currency, right? So what I would do is, again, click on that cell to select that cell that contains those sales numbers, and then go down to the properties panel at the bottom, select format. Right, so again, I selected the cell, properties panel at the bottom, select the format tab there, and then assign a number format. Right, so here's this is a default format that it's coming up with. I could assign a number format and put a for example, a $ in front of it, that would basically give me currency format. You might notice that there's also an explicit currency format here, so I could also use that. The difference is, in case I haven't mentioned this before in a previous webinar, the difference is that the currency format is basically locale adapting, right? So if you're in a, if you're in a U.S. locale, if you're logging in from a U.S. locale, then it will display in dollars. But if you're logging in from some other locale, for example, Europe, then the value might display as euros, right? It's a locale adapting currency format, right? So that may or may not be what you want. If that's not what you want, then you can always do a number format and put the currency symbol explicitly in front of the number format, and that will work, and that will then always be, in this case, $, regardless of where the user is logging in to view the report from. Because I explicitly specified the $ symbol, it'll remain a $ symbol. So let's just take a look at what this table looks like now. Again, I can flip over to the preview by clicking the preview tab at the top, right? And that, because I've got refresh on change enabled up here, right? When I click the preview tab, it automatically regenerates, and you can see that I've got my formatting, I've got my alignment, and so this table is pretty much done. The only thing that that kind of sticks out at me is the fact that it's much wider than it needs to be. It takes up the full report width, and obviously there's no reason it shouldn't, because I don't have anything else to put there. But but if I want to make it a little bit more compact so that the person reading this doesn't have to scan all the way across from the state and try to follow a straight line, find out what the sales are, I can just tighten up this table a little bit. There's a few different ways to do that. I can do that manually, right? I can actually drag the table columns to make it the size that I want, or I can right-click on the table, go to Properties, and there are a few layout settings for a table. These are automatic layout settings: fit page, fit content and page, fit content. So without going into all the details what each of them does, basically if I select fit content, then I will expect the table to shrink down to be just large enough for the contents that it's displaying, right? So it should be, if I do this, it should be no larger than necessary to contain the state name and the corresponding sales. So let's see what that result is. I select that one, press OK. Right, you can see that it got a lot smaller. In fact, it may even be now too small. So let's take a look at it. I'll switch Live Edit back on, right? And I can see that that is, that is quite compact. But perhaps I might like a little bit more space, and so then I can, adjust it manually a little bit, by doing this kind of thing. So now I've basically overridden that automatic layout. So now it's no longer in that automatic layout mode. By doing that, basically I put it into manual mode. So if I right-click on the table again and go back to Properties, you can see that rather than having one of these automatic layout modes selected, it's switched itself back to manual column widths, right? By making that change, by explicitly dragging the columns, right, it puts it into manual size mode, right? So I basically overrode the automatic sizing. The only other thing I do is maybe align the table to the center, so I'll just, sometimes if you need to select the table as a whole, you can click in the left margin next to the table. So for example, if the chart is selected and you want to select the table, you can click in the left margin next to the table. The reason I mention that is that sometimes it's easy to, instead of selecting the table as a whole, you might select a cell in the table, and then the alignment options would apply to that cell. But so what I want to do is select the table as a whole and then align the table to the center. All right, so this is basically the, our very simple report. All right, sales by state report. It's got a chart. It's got a table. Nothing really complicated about any of that. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and let me just check that that is pretty much what I expected. Yeah, pretty much. Other than the reversal of the sales in the states. So let's go ahead and save this. Right now it's called Untitled 0. So I'm going to press the Save button. And there are a couple of options when you save a report. I'm just waiting for the dialog box to come up here. Seems to be thinking about it. Not sure why. There it is. So there's a couple of options when you're saving a report. There's a local report option and there's a repository report. Basically, local report option will just save the report file in the location that you that you specify, anywhere, pretty much anywhere, that you can navigate to here. And the file is saved as an SRT file, .srt. That's you can see down here, report template file .srt. The other option is repository report, and if you select this option, then the report will be saved into the current working repository, and I'll show you in a moment what the current working repository is. This is generally a pretty handy option because what you can do is you can set the current working repository to the same repository, for example, that that one of your servers is using. Let's say a test server, right? So let's say you've got a test server running on this machine, which in fact I do. I have the Style Intelligence server running on this machine. If I set up Style Studio's current working repository to point to the same repository as the server, then when I save this report as a repository report, it gets saved into that repository, and then I can go right over to the server and load it up in the user portal. That's a very handy thing. So I'll show you in a second just where you would set the current working repository, but I'll give the report a name, call it Sales by State. Save it as a repository report. I'm not going to worry about an alias or anything like that. Press save. And now this report is saved. It's called Sales by State. If I look in the asset panel here under Report Repository, I'll see it listed there, Sales by State. Right, it's shown with a lock icon because I still have it open in Style Studio. In general, when you're working in Style Studio, when somebody has an asset open, not only a report, but a data source or any other type of thing that you can do in Style Studio, whenever it's open for editing, it will always show with a lock symbol that is basically to prevent another developer from simultaneously trying to edit that asset, right? Because you wouldn't, if you have a query open for editing in Style Studio, you wouldn't want another developer to simultaneously open that query and start making changes, because then whose changes are going to be respected if they conflict with each other. So basically there's a built-in locking mechanism so that shouldn't happen. So there shouldn't be somebody else modifying this report using a different instance of Style Studio at the same time that I'm modifying this report using Style Studio. In any case, so there it is listed in the repository, and because I saved it as a repository report, and because Style Studio's current working repository is the same as my server repository, my test server that I have running, so what I can do is I can go over, and here I've got my test server, my running. This is the user portal for my test server. I can go right over here, go to repository, and I can find that report there because again, I saved it into the repository that this test server is reading reports from. So there it is, Sales by State, and I can test it out here. Now, so just so there it is. Nothing that surprising about it. So just to complete the cycle here, where would you go from here? So let's say you've done this, you've designed this report, you've saved it somewhere where it's accessible by a test server, right? And you load it up in your test server, everything looks great, you say, okay, this thing is ready to go. What would you do then to get it to your production server? And this is going a little bit outside the scope of this webinar, but basically what you would do is you would go to Enterprise Manager on your test server. So I would go to Enterprise Manager, log in, right, still on my test server here, and I would find the report that I created, right, so I would go to Repository, Export Asset, right, this is how you basically move assets in and out of different server instances, server installations, right, so select Export Asset, find that particular report that you created, Sales by State, right, add it over here, give a name for the jar file, like report to deploy, whatever. Right, and then you would see which of the required components, right? So this report requires 3 other components: the Sales by State query, the orders data source, and a custom table style 3. Right, you can decide if you want to include those in the bundle or not, and then you press OK, and basically it saves that that asset and any of the other stuff that you select over here into a jar file. And then what you can do is you can import that jar file into your production environment, right? So that's the trajectory that you would follow when you're designing a report, right? You would design it, save it, open it up on a test server or QA server, whatever you have. And when you're satisfied with it, then you would export it from that environment, and then you would go over to your production server, and on your production server, open up Enterprise Manager, go to Import Asset, and import that jar file into your production environment. Right, so that's the recommended approach. Okay, now let me just say a word about, I said that when you save as a repository report, I'm back in Style Studio here. When you save as a repository report in Style Studio, which is what we did, it gets saved into the current working repository. The current working repository you can find by going to the File menu in Style Studio, going to Configure, and selecting the Repository tab. Right? And in there, if you click on, you can see that right now there's just one repository specified. It's called Default Repository. The repository that's shown with the check mark, with the green check mark, is the current working repository. Right? So this is basically telling me that my current working repository is this location. Right? And this location happens to be also the repository location for my server that's running on my machine. Right? That's why it's got this funny address, tomcat/webapp/sree/webinf/classes. That's the default repository location for our default installation of the server, right? And so Style Studio, when you save a report as a repository report, gets saved into that location, so it's immediately available to the server. Now there are other ways to set up repositories. You can set up multiple repositories. You can set up different kinds of repositories, and that's going outside the scope of this little webinar. So I'm going to not talk any more about that, but at least this gives you the idea of one approach to go about saving reports and deploying reports. Okay, so that's that report. If there's any questions on that, feel free to chat me. Otherwise, I'll just run right into the next example, and we'll go as far as we can in the time we have. So the next example is a very similar report, some slight differences. The one difference is that the chart and the table are based in this case off of a data model. We'll see that from a mechanical standpoint it doesn't really make that much difference. So let's set up the chart really quickly because that's very similar. The only difference will be the highlight. So it's again total versus state, but this time drawn from the data model. So I'm going to close this example, open a new report, and drop in a chart. I'll do the chart quickly again because it's basically the same chart that we did before, with the exception that I'm not using that sales by state query. Instead, I'm using the order model. Right? The order model is our sample data model. We've used this a lot in many of the other webinars that we've done. So I want on the x-axis the customer state, so I find that field, and on the y-axis the product total. Again, it's metadata view by default, right? So if I want to see it in, with actual data, I press the live edit button. Right, so there's that. Again, if I want to change the title here or there, we know how to do that. You can right-click on the chart, go to Properties, change the title if you want for an axis, total sales, and let's say just state. Okay, so there's the chart. Now what about that highlight? Basically what we want to do here is we want to highlight a group if the group is New Jersey. Right? So if the state is New Jersey, we want to highlight that group. So that's the concept of a highlight. And to do that, what you do is you click on the chart, and then in the properties, the main properties panel at the bottom, there's a highlight tab. Right? And it's pretty simple to set up a highlight like this. A highlight is a conditional format. It's basically formatting that applies when some data condition is met. So what you do is you press the new button. I'm pretty sure we've done this in dashboards and it's not much different in reports. So I'll just call the highlight, NJ. Seems like a good name for a New Jersey highlight. I'll set the formatting. It's going to be the foreground color will be green. And then edit the condition. There's an edit condition button at the bottom. Press that. And the condition customer state is equal to NJ. Right? I get this list of states by pressing the browse button over here, browse data button, and when I click that browse data button, basically what it does is it runs a query on the data source, in this case the data model, on that particular field, customer state. So it populates that list there, makes it very easy to choose. New Jersey, press append. Right? So there's my highlight condition. The highlight will apply when the state is equal to New Jersey. Press OK, and then press the apply button over here on the right side of the panel. In some cases you need to do that, in other cases not. When you're doing a highlight, I think you do need to press it, so I'll press it. Press apply, and you can see that now I've got that highlight on the state of New Jersey. So that's the chart. We can also go ahead and add a title to this report. This one is called the what? Sales highlight report. So let's drag in a text element. Again, like we did before, just throw it up there in the header. Sales highlight report. Okay, now the next thing we want to do is we want to add a table down below. Now in this case, this is going to be, if I can find that slide, this table is going to be, again, based on the data model, right? So in this case, I can't simply drag in the data source to create the table because the data model has like, I don't know, like, 30 some, maybe more fields. So I'm going to have to build the table a different way, and what I'll do is I'll use the table wizard. Table wizard is kind of a helpful tool for building a table. It's not the only way to build a table, but we'll use it in this case. And what I want to do is I also want to add grouping to this table, right? I don't want all of the detail records, all of the individual sales. What I want is groups of sales grouped by the salesperson and by the state, right? So in other words, you can see here that I've got a group of Annie's sales in each of the different states, and then the total of all of Annie's sales in that particular state, which is not just one sale, right? Annie has a lot of sales in each state, right? Maybe hundreds, right? And I want to total up all those sales for that particular state, right? So it's a grouped and aggregated table, and then we'll add a highlight. So how do you do a table like this? Again, like I said, we're going to use the table wizard, which in many cases is the easiest way to do it. It's not the only way to do it because another approach, which we will not use in this case, but I just want to illustrate it quickly, another approach is that you can add a blank table just by dragging in the table component from the toolbox. Right? You can just add a blank table like this, and then you can drop fields into the table. Right? So you can find the data source that you're interested in. Let's say the order model, and if you want the customer company field, you can drop that into the table. Right? And so you can add data into a table this way, and then make other modifications on the table, apply grouping and aggregation using other techniques. So that's one way to build up a table, but in many cases, if you know what you're shooting for, it's easier to do it using the wizard. So I'm going to delete this table, right? And instead, I'll just put the insertion point where I want it, go to the toolbox, and instead of dragging the table into the report, I'll just click on the table. Click on the table component here, and that opens up this data binding wizard for a table. The data binding wizard is a one-time tool, right? You can use it once, but then you can't come back to it, right? Although anything that you can do in the wizard, you could also do afterwards. So it's not like you're going to be in a complete jam if you mess something up in the wizard. But so it's worth noting that it's a one-time tool. It's just to build the initial table, and then you don't come back to the wizard again. So the first step is you select the data source. We'll grab the order model. Then you proceed to the next step. In this case, I'm going to skip the columns tab. Here, ordinarily, if I was building a detail table, I would select the fields that I want to appear in the table as columns. But in this case, I'm just going to jump across to grouping and summary. And because when I select the grouping and summary columns, those will automatically be added under the columns tab. So I'm going to select first name and state as the grouping fields. That would be salesperson first name, customer state. Those are going to be my two grouping fields. So it's going to group first on the salesperson name, and then secondarily on the state. And then the summary field, the aggregated field, is going to be the product total. Okay, now if I leave it like this, right, if I just leave it with grouping and summary like this, and were to click finish, then what I would end up with is a table that has both the summary information, in other words, the grouping information and the aggregated totals, as well as all the detail information. So if I were to leave it like this, I would get the totals for each salesperson and state, but I would also get all of the individual sales, right, which again could be hundreds of sales in each state. Right? In this case, that's not what I want. I don't want that detail information, and so what I can do is I can suppress that by going to the Table Options tab and selecting Show Summary Only. Now again, if I neglected to do this in the wizard, because like I said, I can't come back here after I'm done, right, I wouldn't be in a jam because I can also do that just by deleting the detail row in the table, right? So if I If I leave it like this, normal grouping, then what will happen is I'll end up in the table that's generated, I'll end up with a detail row, and I can always just delete that detail row, and that will leave me just with the summary information. But if you know what you want, then it's might as well set it up over here. So select Show Summary Only, and then press Finish. Right, and this is the result that we get. Right, you can see it runs onto a second page. Right, so here's page 2. There's the header being repeated at the top of the second page. And you can see that basically it's grouped information, and for each group of salesperson and state, I get the aggregated total. Okay, so no real surprises there. If you were doing this in metadata view, it would look like this. Right, you click on the table, you can see that there's the header row. Up top, there's three rows here. There's a GF2 row. GF2 stands for Group Footer 2. The reason it's Group Footer 2 is because we've got 2 levels of grouping, right? And they're basically being combined into a single row. And then there's the global footer, which gives us the grand total at the bottom. Okay, so that's what it would look like in metadata view. Okay, so let's see what else we need to change over here to this table. So I'll go back to the slide over here. So it looks like there's some basic formatting just on the first row. So that's not a table style. This looks like just some ad hoc formatting. So we can do that, and then we'll just apply the highlight. So let's go ahead and do those two things. So we'll apply some ad hoc formatting on this title row. You can actually select the entire row of a table by clicking just in the left margin next to the row. So you can either do it by shift clicking, right? So I click here and then shift click to select the other cells in that row, or you can just click out here in the left next to the row. That selects the entire row, and I'll go down and I'll just set a kind of a dark gray background and make the text there bold and large and centered. And so just some basic ad hoc formatting. Let's go ahead and add the highlight, right? And again, the highlight here is going to be that we want to highlight the state of New Jersey. So I'm going to right-click, click on the table to select it, right? And then in the Properties panel at the bottom, there's the Highlight tab, and I'll set a highlight just like we did for the chart. So the highlight will be, I'll call it again NJ. Right, I can use the same name again, NJ, and you can see that for a table, there's a few other formatting options here: foreground, background. In this case, I'll do background, so I'll set background green. No, actually, yeah, I actually made a mistake. What I should have done is I should have selected the. It looks like I clicked on the column header. I don't want to highlight the column header. What I want to do is highlight the row. So before I proceed with that and press apply, let me back out of there. It says highlight incomplete definition. Okay. What I want to do is I want to select the row, right? I want to apply this highlight to a not a detail row, but one of these grouping rows of the table, right? So I need to select a row, right? If I only wanted the highlight to apply to a particular cell, like over here or over here, then I would just select the cell. But here I'll select the row, and then proceed with the highlight, just like I was doing. Sorry for the digression. And I'll set a background color of green for the row. Press the Edit Condition button, and same condition that we had before, that the customer state supplier state. Try again. Customer state is equal to NJ. Okay, and then press apply. All right, and you can see that here's NJ, right? That row gets highlighted, and if I go onto the second page, you can see that there's another instance of NJ, Sue's sales in New Jersey, and that row gets highlighted as well. Right, so now we've seen a couple of illustrations of conditional formatting that's using a highlight in a report. Now, the one other thing that we want to do to this report is we want to put a condition on the report, both on the chart and on the table. And the condition is going to be that we want to see only data from a particular salesperson. Right? So let's do the table first, because it's more obvious in the table whether we get it right or wrong. In the chart, we can apply the condition, but the chart doesn't explicitly break it out by salesperson, so it's better to test this out on the table. So to apply a condition, what you do is you right-click on the table. Right? It doesn't matter if you're in live data view or in metadata view. thought I just changed it to metadata. All right, so what you do is you right-click on the table and select condition. All right, and then you apply a condition such as salesperson first name is equal to, and we could select something explicit here like Sue, just to test it out, make sure that it's working. Salesperson first name is equal to Sue, press append, OK. Right, now in the metadata view, it's not really clear whether it worked or not, so I'm going to flip it over to live edit, or I could do a preview. And you can see that the condition is being honored, right? So I set a condition that salesperson first name is equal to Sue, and so I'm only seeing Sue's data. But now what if we wanted the user to, the user of the report, when they view the report in the portal, we want them to supply the name of the salesperson that they want to see, right? We don't want to assume that they want to see Sue's data only. Perhaps they want to see Eric's data. So, so what we could do is we can parameterize that condition. So I'll go back into that condition definition, right? Right-click on the table, select condition, salesperson first name is equal to Sue. What I can do instead of setting that explicitly is I can press the little pop-up button all the way on the right over here and select variable. Right? And then what I'll do is I'll provide the name of a variable such as salesperson. Right? This is just an arbitrary name that I'm typing. Salesperson is the name of a variable, and basically when I change the condition like this, what I have is a parameterized condition that will then, in order for the condition to be completed, it needs a value for this variable salesperson, right? It's going to be salesperson first name is equal to some value that will be held in that variable, and that value will be acquired automatically from the user, right? So whenever you have a parameterized condition, the report will attempt to acquire that parameter value automatically from the user. So I'm going to press modify here to change that condition, press OK, and you can see that because I'm in live edit mode, it immediately prompts me for the name, the value for that parameter, right? So it's asking me, okay, well, you want to apply that condition, give me a value for the variable salesperson. So I can type in, for example, Eric, and press OK, right? And now the table is filtered to give me just Eric's data. All right, let's do a preview just to see how that would work if I do a preview. All right, so if I preview the report again, I get prompted for the parameter value. I can enter, for example, Robert, press OK. Right, and there I get a table with just Robert's data. Now what happens if I don't enter anything, right? If I do a preview and I don't enter anything for the salesperson, just press OK, then what's going to happen is I'll see all of the salespeople, right? Because the way that conditions work is that, parameterized conditions, is that if the parameter does not have a value, then the condition is simply dropped. It's ignored, right? Because without that parameter value, there's no way to apply the condition, right? You don't have a right-hand side for the condition, so the condition just gets ignored. When the condition is ignored, you see all the salespeople. Okay, so that's basically it for that report. It's an example of parameterized filtering. I'm going to put the same condition on the chart, just very quickly right-click the chart, select condition for the chart, put the very same condition that salesperson first name is equal to a parameter, a variable called salesperson. I'm using the same parameter name because that way when the user supplies a value for the parameter salesperson, it can be used in both the chart and the table. Yes. Okay, so now I've got a parameterized report, right? It's a report that will prompt the user for a parameter value, and the value that the user enters will be used to filter both the chart and the table to return just data for a single salesperson. So I'm going to save this as sales highlight report, and then very quickly I'm just going to go on to the last thing, but if you have questions, feel free to ask. So we'll just call this sales highlight report. Again, I'm saving it as a repository report. And just very quickly, if I head over to my browser here, because I saved it into the same repository that the server is using, I can go to the repository here in the user portal, and I can find it there, sales highlight report. It will prompt me for that parameter. You can see that the prompt is different in the portal than in Style Studio here. It's basically an HTML form that you get prompted with. And I can enter a name for that salesperson, press OK. Right, and the report gets filtered. Now there are a number of things that you can do to customize that parameter prompting for those of you who are thinking about that, that you don't like the parameter prompt, or there's some other things you'd like to do in terms of prompting. There are a variety of different angles that you could go at prompting from. First of all, there's under the report menu here, there's a parameter option that opens the parameter definition dialog box. This lets you set some basic properties of your parameters, for example, defaults and tooltips and labels, right? If you want to change the label as what's displayed instead of salesperson, if you wanted to, have the label say something like enter, salesperson name or something like that, you could change the label, right? So there's a bunch of things you can set here, but beyond that, you can also create what are called parameter sheets, which are basically custom parameter entry forms, where basically you have full control over the the various elements that you put in the form, whether they're radio buttons or combo boxes, and you could add any text and any background and so on. So there are a lot of ways to customize parameter entry, which we're not going to get into here, but just bring that to your attention. Let's, in the last 5 minutes that we have here, let me just see if I can jam in one further twist here, and that is just doing a drill down that passes a parameter value. So what I'd like to do is I want to very quickly whip up this report. I'll just do the chart part of the report. So I'll just do a pie chart here. It's basically a summary of sales for the different employees. And the idea here is that when the user clicks on one of these slices, I want to drill down to the sales highlight report, and I want the report to be filtered to display the data that for the employee that the user clicked on. Right? So if I click on, let's say, Eric's green slice over here, I want to see this report filtered to give me just Eric's data. All right, so hopefully that makes sense. So I'm going to whip it up really quick. So here we go. I'll leave this report open here in the background, and I'll just create a new report, blank tabular report. I'll throw in a chart, pie chart. And I'll just I'll give it a quick title. Just call it summary report. Okay, and so here's my pie chart. What I want is I want I'll go to the order model. I want the total to be the size of the slices, so I'll put that on the y-axis as the measure, product total. And for a pie chart, I don't know if we've done pie charts before, but basically what you do to define the grouping, you use the visual panel in the chart editor. So I'm going to, I obviously want to group this pie chart by salesperson first name, so I'll drag first name down to the color region. I want the different groups to be different colors. Let me put this in live edit mode. Obviously this is not a pie chart. There's one more thing I need to do, which is to go to the select chart style button over here, press that, and switch it over to a pie chart. All right, so there's my pie chart. I can hide the, I don't really need the y-axis title here, so I'll go into properties here and just hide that title. And I can do show values. All right, so there the values are displayed. I don't want those values to be the raw totals, though. I want those to be percentages. So what I'll do is over here where I have my measure, right, the sum product total on the y-axis, what I'll do is press the edit measure button here, and I'll switch the calculation method to percent of grand total. Right, so instead of displaying the raw values, which is what it has right now, I'll just display the percent of grand total. Right, so now I just see, for example, that Eric has 29% of the grand total sales. So there's my pie chart. I know I went through that relatively quickly, but my purpose here is mainly to show you the drill down aspect. So I'm going to save this just as summary, sales summary. Sales summary report. So now the question is, how do I add that drill down, right? So when the user clicks, for example, on, let's say, Annie's slice over here, how do I drill down to the sales highlight report that we already made and filter it so that it displays only Annie's data? Well, what I do is I click on the chart over here, my summary chart, and there's down at the bottom here in the properties panel, there's a hyperlink tab. So select that tab, and then select the Asset Link option here. Asset Link means that you're going to drill down, you're going to use this hyperlink to drill down to either a report or a view sheet, in contrast to a web link, which means that you're going to drill to a web page. So select Asset Link, find the report that you want to drill to. In this case, it's called the Sales Highlight Report, the one that we just made. We can add a tooltip, something like drill to salesperson details or something like that. Salesperson state sales or something like that to kind of make it clear what's going on. Drill to salesperson state sales. And then we'll select the disable parameter prompt option because we don't, what we're going to do is when the user clicks on one of the slices of the pie, we want to pass along the name of that, the salesperson corresponding to that slice. So we don't want to prompt, when the user drills down to the sales highlight report, we don't want to prompt them again to enter the name of a salesperson since that's going to be supplied in the hyperlink. So we'll just turn that disable parameter prompt off. And then over here, we'll just add the parameter that we want to pass. So press the add button. You can note that in the top, the top setting here, parameter name, it's already populated by the name of the parameter that's in the sales highlight report. So you might wonder, how does it know that there's a parameter called salesperson? How does it know that there's a variable salesperson in that sales highlight report? Well, it knows that because we specified over here as the link that report. So it looked into that report, right? When we opened up this, popped up this window, in the instant before it appeared, it looked into that sales highlight report and it saw that there was a parameterized condition in there and the parameter name is salesperson. So that's why it's suggesting that to us. If that report had more parameters, more variables, then there would be a list of all the variables, all the parameters in that report, and we would choose the one into which we want to pass the value that we're sending in the hyperlink. Right? In this case, there's no choice because there is only one parameter that we can send it into. And so what I want to do is into the sales highlight report, I want to pass the salesperson first name. Right? So when the user clicks on a slice in this pie chart in the summary report, I want to pass the corresponding salesperson first name into the parameter called salesperson in the sales highlight report. And so that's how you get the whole thing working, right? The whole drill down working. Right? So hopefully that's relatively clear. Press OK. Right? So this hyperlink is now set up. Press apply. Right? And I'll save this report again. Right? And now we can test it out. We could test it both in the by previewing it here in Style Studio and also by checking it out on the server. I'll just do both of those very quickly since I know I'm over time. Anyway, here's, let's preview the summary report here, right? So there's the preview, nothing dramatic. If I click on one of these slices here, so let's say I click on the blue slice. Oh, I didn't see the tooltip. I guess the tooltip doesn't display. But anyway, you can see that it drilled me down. Did it filter it right? Let me just double check that. I didn't actually pay attention to what I clicked on. Yeah, so I clicked on Annie, right? So let me try clicking on Sue, right? So click on Sue's slice. You can see it takes me down to the sales highlight report and filters it to give me just Sue's data, both the chart and the table. Let's quickly check it out in the portal as well. So I'm just going to refresh the listing here. There's my sales summary report. All right, and there's my pie chart. Right, and so if I click on, let's say, Robert's slice over here, right, it loads up the sales highlight report, and it gives me just Robert's data in the table and in the chart. Now you might wonder where the highlight is. Where's the highlight on New Jersey? Well, it turns out that Robert doesn't have sales in New Jersey, so there's no highlight. But if we were to, if we were to try out somebody else like Annie, does Annie have sales in New Jersey? No, another poor choice. Let me try one more choice. Pretty sure Eric has sales in New Jersey. So if I try Eric, right, so there's the highlight. Okay, I'm going to wrap it up there. That was a quick tour of three of the examples from our regular training class, just to introduce you to some basic aspects of creating a report, adding charts, adding tables. I think next month we're going to go into more detail in charts and tables. I believe that I glanced ahead at the next scheduled webinar, so I think it's more detail on charts and tables. So if you had questions about how do I do this or that with charts and tables, maybe come back next month and we'll we'll explore it in a little bit more detail. So if anybody has any questions on today's webinar or anything we covered, feel free to type in the chat box. I'll be happy to take any questions. Otherwise, whoops. And I'll wait a minute just to see if anyone is typing questions. But for those of you who need to scoot, thanks for joining. I appreciate it, and hope to see you back next month. And I'll just stay online for another couple minutes. Again, the video should be available sometime early next week, and Mark from marketing will send out a link to the video. So I don't see any questions popping up. So. I'll stay on the air just another minute, but I'll stop talking. But for those of you leaving, have a great weekend, and hope to see you back next month. Okay, thanks, Chris. Okay, it looks like there's no questions. So I'm going to sign off. So again, see you next month, and have a nice weekend. Thanks.